church is a lot of things, isn't it? A church isn't just one thing. It's a family. It's a collection of servants and learners. It's a group of people who need healing. It's a collection of worshipers. And it's also an institution. An institution that requires all of its people to invest in it, to believe in it, and to dream for it, to dream on its behalf. An institution that needs people who are willing to make tough decisions and invest themselves in the hard work of leadership. An institution that needs people who support it in a variety of ways, on both the good days and the bad days. And an institution that needs people to remember its past, its present, and its future. There's another side to that coin, though, something I hadn't really thought about until I started to write this sermon, something I hadn't stopped to think about, and really in fullness until just now. An institution, and thus a church, seems to need a lot of people, right? And a lot of people who do a lot of thinking on behalf of that church, right? But why is this how God's church works? Why is this the case? Why do institutions that are dedicated to the divine, like ours, need human involvement at all? Why can't we all just sit down, look up, and let God tell us what to do with each and every choice that we make? This is the spacing on the bulletin. Thou shalt use this font. Why can't we just sit back and let God tell us what to do each step of the way, with each step of our shared life together? Why do we need to invest? Why do we need to invest our hearts and our minds into that shared life that we have together? What holy function does this church's and any church's priesthood of all believers truly accomplish? Thought-provoking questions, I would hope. But if we want to get the answers to these questions, well, perhaps we should ask one guy. The one guy who always seems to know what to do. The one guy who always seems to have the answers. Let's ask Jesus, because unsurprisingly, Jesus has the answer. In today's scripture passage, we hear Jesus speaking to his disciples of salt and of light. And you might not really ever think about this unless you were prompted to, unless you were asked to stop and think about it, but salt and light are actually two things that we absolutely need to survive and to thrive as human beings. It's obvious that we need light. You can look around and see that. We need light to see, right? We need light to work. We need light to grow crops and raise livestock, to build buildings and use tools. We need light to spend time with friends and family, to read and write and reflect on the nature of being human. We need light to get by. We need light to exist. We couldn't exist without light. We need salt too. And this is a little more subtle because our spice palates have evolved over the last 2,000 years or so, but we really do need salt. In the ancient world, salt was the only readily available seasoning for food, so really when Jesus speaks about salt, he's talking about flavoring, taste, fullness. But he's also talking about salt, which served to preserve food. If you needed to get a lot of food from one place to another, especially if it was meat or something like that, you would rub it in salt and use that as a preservative. So think about what that means, right? If people are living further and further and further apart because human civilization is growing and expanding, you need salt to get food across all that territory. Salt allowed people to plant new towns and new cities and to grow in number. Salt was such a commonplace thing is such a commonplace thing today that we tend to forget that salt was actually an essential ingredient for the creation of human civilization itself, for the spreading across the world of people. Light makes life possible. Salt makes it possible for us to live together in growing and thriving communities. Now, do y'all think that Jesus is talking about literal salt and light or figurative salt and light today? What do you think? You think he actually thinks of the disciples as something to come out of a salt shaker or a flashlight? I see a couple of no's. Got figurative from Ruth. Thank you. Today, as Jesus comes to preach, as he continues through his sermon, we come to realize that, you know what, he's actually not talking about salt and light in a literal way. As salt and light are to humanity's physical life, so are the disciples meant to be for humanity's spiritual and moral life together. The disciples are meant to illuminate, to help others see the truth about the world and about the creator of that world. The disciples are meant to drive out darkness, to labor against evil, to labor against the darkness that rests out in the world and in all of our hearts. The disciples are meant to preserve, to help sustain the lives of human beings, and to allow human life to flourish. And the disciples are meant to introduce flavor into our otherwise bland existences by helping us to worship, to serve, to learn about, and to live with God and God's people in vibrant, new, exciting, flavorful, rich ways. It's a striking metaphor. It's a striking way for Jesus to preach. Most especially because it kind of answers, if you think about it, it answers the question that we asked earlier about God's relationship to the church. Today, Jesus, who let's none of us forget, is just now beginning his ministry, stands up in front of a group of people as God made flesh, God incarnate, and tells them, you are the salt of the earth. You are the light of the world. Does he really mention himself at all in that? Or does he put the emphasis on others? You are the salt of the earth. You are the light of the world. You are the one who was meant to do the work of illuminating, flavoring, preserving, and driving out darkness. We have this institution. We have this body, not because God needs us, but because God chooses to work through people rather than to just work for people. God chooses to work through us rather than to simply work for us. Our God is revealed to the world not just through mighty miracles, but through inspired speeches given by people, difficult conversations, noble acts of service. God is revealed through sweat and grit and tired eyes and brows furrowed deep in thought. Our God is revealed in the world by people working together to make that world a better place. But here's a wrench in that equation. We don't do that work by ourselves. And we don't start that work by ourselves, do we? In my old high school, over by the football facility that we had, there used to be a bunch of plaques listing old awards and honoring old players and old football players, old seniors, people who had gone through the program well before any of my friends and I did. Every time I would walk to our locker room, I would see these images of players from generations past, some of them going back many, many, many years well before me. There were lists of old records alongside those images, and of course my friends and I, our main thought when we saw those numbers on those pieces of paper was, let's try and break that record, because we're young, and we're tough, and we're the best, and we can do it all by ourselves, because that's what you're supposed to think when you're 17, right? These symbols, though, weren't our coach's attempts, not just our coach's attempts to challenge us. They were our coach's attempts to show myself and my teammates that we were actually part of a program with a legacy. That what was happening at our school, we were not creating from the ground up. We were coming into the story from part way through the story. What we were doing by taking the field stretched back many, many years to well before any of us had been born. I think our wall of pastors that you'll see if you turn left right out of the sanctuary accomplishes something similar. It reminds us all that the church doesn't belong just to us. It reminds us all that the church has played a role in this community, in this area, for these people for a very, very long time, and in a certain way, we are not its owners, are we? We're its trustees. Only a few of us, if even that, could say that they had met every single pastor on that wall at one point or another, right? Most likely, there are a few on that wall known to probably all of us today through simple legacy and memory. They are a reminder that Smith Memorial is bigger than all of us, that the United Methodist Church is bigger than all of us, and that God's church is bigger than all of us. And today, as Jesus speaks to the disciples about being salt and light, he wants to offer them a similar message. As he speaks to them about their absolutely central, absolutely focal, absolutely essential role in the world, he also speaks to them about the importance of their shared past. You are not creating this thing on your own, disciples. Do not think, Jesus tells them, that I have come to abolish the law or the prophets. For I have not come to abolish them. I have come to fulfill them. Even as Jesus speaks to his disciples about their essential place in the world, the key role that they play in this story, which is just now beginning around him, around them as well, he reminds them they're not the first, and they won't be the last either. This isn't where the story begins, and this isn't where the story ends. Moses received divine wisdom and shared it with the world, and his followers pursued that divine wisdom because God was with them, and they knew that. Jeremiah and Ezekiel carved out space for faithful worship and fidelity to God and God's commandments when Israel had become twisted and broken. Isaiah spoke of God's providence. Amos challenged the rich and the powerful and dared them to live more justly. Soon Jesus will do all of these same things, and he knows that after he leaves the scene, his disciples will be needed to take up that mantle and carry on with him, to carry on in his memory and in the memory of all those others who came before. His disciples will take up their own cross and follow him. Jesus has not come to replace the past. Jesus has come to complete the past, to finish the work that God started in Abraham. And his words today remind us, as we attempt together, all of us, to lead the church forward, that we do so as part of something much, much, much greater than ourselves or this moment in time which we all find ourselves in. The church is not a creation of the moment, meant to be swayed from moment to moment by the winds of time and the perceptions of the people within it. The church belongs to God and God alone. This is how Jesus' earthly ministry begins. By calling people into ministry with him and by reminding them that as they go forward, they do not go forward alone, that they have a legacy that they are a part of. His message today is a message of empowerment, but it's also a warning. Do not lose your saltiness. Do not hide your light under a bushel, because both salt and light are not things that you have for yourself. These are gifts given to you, and you are not the first and will not be the last to be salty or to carry light. This is not something you have made for yourself. Do not forget who you are. Do not forget who you work for. Do not forget to whom you belong, disciples of Jesus Christ. Do not forget. Because in the end, being a Christian is not about our choices. Being a Christian is about our ability to recognize God's choice to already love us. We are here today because God has brought us here. The good we do as a church comes from God leading us towards that good and equipping us for the work which lies ahead. Church is about God, not about people. Each day, as we go about the business of shaping and molding our institution, we should all remember that the church is the mechanism by which God's work unfolds in the world. It's the means by which people experience God's grace, feel God's presence, see God's light. And it is the site in which we partner with God as disciples for the holy work of Christian service. But it is also the continuation of work begun well before us and work which will continue long after us. Even now, God is in control, writing our story. May we not lose our saltiness. May we not hide our light under a bushel. Instead, may we remember that God, the source of all life, the one who flavors all our lives, preserves all our existences, is at work, has been at work, and will be at work the world over. May we rise to this holy responsibility and walk forward together, salt and light in hand. Amen.